faithful examples we have throughout the Word of God. And looking forward to this one. I really love the account of Joseph. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob and the first son by Rachel, his beloved wife. The name of this lesson, I'm sorry, is Joseph, Faith and Longsuffering. And if you know the story of Joseph, the account of Joseph, there was definitely some long suffering going on in that life. And once again, Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob and the first son by Rachel, his beloved wife. The Bible says that Jacob loved him because he was the son of his old age. But as I read, what I see, what it seems to me is that this was his favored son because he had only ever wanted to marry Rachel in the first place. He had no desire to have 4 wives. That was not his intention in the first place. He only wanted to marry Rachel. And he considered Joseph to be his firstborn son, regardless of the 10 who were born before him. The name Joseph means Jehovah has added. And we read in Genesis 30, 22 through 24, "And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and opened her womb, and she conceived, and bare a son, and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, and said, The Lord shall add to me another son." At this point in history, and in this culture, a married woman would consider herself basically worthless if she could not produce a male heir for her husband. This may seem odd today, but this was the mindset of that era. A barren woman would be considered cursed of God. Joseph broke that curse and gave hope to Rachel that she would conceive again. He's one of my favorite Old Testament heroes of faith, and I always look forward to reading of his faithfulness in the midst of unimaginable circumstances. He is absolutely a wonderful source of encouragement when we are facing times of difficulty. And we all will face times of difficulty. We're assured of difficulty in this life. No matter what came his way, Joseph took it in stride and always excelled in whatever it was that he did. The Old Testament character featured in this lesson, the commentary, was a notable example from his youth until his death at 110 years of age. He was an example in times of adversity and in times of prosperity. He served God regardless of the circumstances, and God allowed the circumstances to become oppressive, even dangerous at times. He did not resist ill treatment, but he did firmly resist temptation. Now, it's one thing to remain submissive when you are at fault, you've done something wrong, and you're suffering as a result of it. That's one thing. But it's something altogether different when an innocent person is accused and bears the punishment and reproach, knowing that his behavior in these times is of the utmost importance. Only one who is fully sold out to God will be able to bear up patiently under similar circumstances. Anybody know the definition of patient? Anybody know? Anybody want to say what patient is? What you think patient is?
Waiting without getting angry.
Hey, yeah. Patience is suffering long without murmuring or complaint. Or as Brother Nick said, waiting without getting angry, without getting frustrated. That's an important part of patience. Patience is long-suffering without murmuring or complaint. Bitterness begins where patience ends. We have to be careful. Just because we're suffering doesn't mean that we're experiencing patience. If we're getting angry, if we're getting frustrated, if we're complaining about what we're having to go through, it's not patience that we're going through. It may be suffering long, but it's not patience unless there is that calm demeanor, that long-suffering willingness to continue to experience these difficult times without complaint, without getting angry. Joseph lived a clean life. He was faithful in service to whomsoever he was accountable. from his own father to the highest authority in the land. He knew his place, and he kept his place. Some commentators have said that he was imprudent on the occasion of relating his two dreams, but the Bible does not so accuse him. Now, in fact, it seems that he did all things well. When he was under his father's care, as the lesson points out, he did his best to please his father in whatever the task was that he was assigned. As a household servant in Potiphar's house, he was so faithful to his duties that he was made the steward of this house. Now, he likely began his service doing menial labor, cleaning, doing heavy lifting, or whatever it was that nobody else wanted to do. He was an earnest worker no matter what his assignment. Now, the position of head steward, we don't have head stewards today, but the position of head steward was a great responsibility and one only given to the most trustworthy of individuals. Then, when he was imprisoned, he could have become bitter. It would have been easy for him to become bitter. But the same spirit remained, and he basically became a trustee who was in charge of the prison under the warden. Now, we've all heard the saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Joseph took this idea to the next level long before the saying was coined. What a wonderful example of a life dedicated to God. When we're truly submitted to Him, our lives will reflect the same attitude at all times. And I have to admit, that's not always been my attitude. And I know that's not an easy attitude to keep in the midst of the trials that we face, whether the things that we're suffering are a result of the choices that we've made on our own, or whether the suffering that we're experiencing is something that has nothing to do with our behavior, but something that someone else has placed on us. It's difficult to have that, to continue in that good and faithful attitude as Joseph did. But if Joseph did it before the advent of Christ, before the thought of salvation, before the potential for sanctification and the indwelling of the Holy Ghost, if Joseph was capable of continuing to keep that attitude at that point, what's our excuse? What excuse do we have? And I'm not pointing my fingers at anybody without pointing my finger at myself. What excuse do we have as humans today, as those who claim to be servants of the Lord? What excuse do we have when we don't portray that same attitude that he had? The Bible devotes some 12 chapters to Joseph's story. Considering his exemplary life, he seems worthy of more attention than is generally given him. In fact, it has been suggested that he was a type of Christ. One commentator, C.I. Scofield, says, while it is nowhere asserted that Joseph was a type of Christ, the analogies are too numerous to be accidental. Then he cites some of those analogies. 1, both Christ and Joseph were objects of a father's love. 2, both were hated by those who should have loved them. 3, both were conspired against with a view to taking their lives. 4, both, when others reviled them, reviled not against them. 5, at least in intent and figure, Joseph's life was taken through envy and hatred, as Christ had actually been taken. 6, both became a blessing to the Gentiles as well as their own people. 7, both gained a Gentile bride. And 8, as Joseph reconciled his brothers to himself and afterward exalted them, so will it be with Christ and his Jewish brethren in due time. And I want to add a little bit to this list. It says envy, but it was that jealousy that caused them to be considered unacceptable. Also, both were sold into the hands of Gentiles for their destruction. In fact, if you think about it, then it was Judah who suggested that Joseph be sold. Now, Judah is Hebrew for Judas, which is Greek. It's the same name, just one is Hebrew version, one is a Greek version. So it was Judah who sold Joseph, and it was Judas who sold Jesus. It's the same name. The only difference was the amount that they were sold for. But when you consider there were a few years between these, inflation would definitely account for that difference. And it would be much closer, considering that. Golden truth, Genesis 50 and 20. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good, to bring to pass as it is this day, to save much people alive. And of course, this is Joseph speaking to his brothers. They had intended to kill him. They had intended to do away with him and make an end to this these dreams that he had, that his brothers would bow down to him. But God knew the end of the story. God used their poor treatment of their brother to benefit not only his own family, but the entire nation of Egypt was rescued from absolute, utter destruction as a result of one man's faithfulness in the midst of unimaginable odds. Whatever struggle you may be facing right now, remember that your good attitude in the midst of any hardship will only make the load lighter. When all is said and done, you may just realize that a much greater good was accomplished through your willingness to endure the difficulties that this life will surely bring on each of us. Jesus said, in this life ye shall have tribulation. Paul said, all who live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. These are promises. We're going to face things that we don't want to face. We're going to have to endure things that we don't enjoy. We're assured of it. And my guess is that as young as some may be in here, we've already experienced some of that. We've already gone through some of that in our own lives up to this point. What makes us think it's going to get any better? We don't have any assurance that it's going to get any better. Matter of fact, we read the Word, we see where we're living, we see the signs of the time. We should know it's only going to get worse. But as long as we remain faithful, as Joseph did, not only will it be a benefit to ourselves, not only will it be a benefit to those we're closest to, our families, our friends, our fellow church members, but we have the potential to reach out far beyond these four walls, far beyond our families, simply by accepting whatever it is that God allows to come into our lives and not acting out, not, why does this happen to me, God? I don't understand what. It's because we live in a fallen world. There is difficulty, there will be difficulty in this life. We can count on it. But it all depends on how we deal with it. What the outcome for us as individuals all depends on how we face those trials that are sure to come upon us from every source. In commentary, part 1, Joseph's early life, Genesis 37, 3, 4, 28, and 36. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. Verse 28, then there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they brought Joseph into Egypt. In verse 36, and the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, but the firstborn of Rachel, the wife whom Jacob truly loved. Rachel was barren, but God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and opened her womb, and she conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Joseph. It is not likely that Jacob realized that the coat of many colors had made his other sons envious of Joseph. But this hatred was aggravated by 2 prophetic dreams which Joseph had pertaining himself and his family. He related the dreams to his brethren, probably not understanding them himself, but they plotted to kill him, then decided to sell him into slavery to merchantmen traveling to Egypt. They took his coat of many colors, which they had stained with the blood of a goat, to Jacob, who supposed that Joseph had been devoured by some wild beast. The merchantmen took him with them to Egypt and sold him to an officer of Pharaoh named Potiphar. Joseph was 17 years old at that time. Just a kid. Now it's clear as I read this that his brothers intended his death, even if they didn't kill him themselves. It was clearly their desire to see their brother dead. Listen to their own words as recorded in Genesis 37:18 through 20. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him. And we shall see what will become of his dreams. They were not at all happy with the situation. We do see that they were kept from killing him themselves, but it would appear that this was only to shift the guilt of his murder off of themselves. Genesis 37:26 and 27. And Judah said to his brethren, What profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Hey, if we kill him, what benefits it to us? We're rid of him, but that doesn't benefit us really. We'll sell him. Then they can kill him, and we'll be able to enjoy the wealth of our ill-gotten gains. Whether he lived or died, they were certain that his dreams were not going to ever come true once they sold him into slavery.
Oh, Chris,
Yes.
I just thought you brought out the point here in the lesson. Joseph was 17 years old.
Right.
I believe you said a kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's noteworthy here that we realize the spirit that this young man had.
Right.
17 years old. Young people are very easily offended,
Mm-hmm.
very easily hurt. They very quickly can build up a wall of resentment.
Oh, yeah.
And that wall can take years and years and years for the Lord to break down in their life.
I lived through it.
But yet here he is 17 years old, and not just some strangers wanted to kill him, but his own
His
brethren.
own flesh and blood.
How would we maintain the spirit of the Lord in our lives to do the right
Right.
thing?
And as you said, that attitude that people of that age tend to have. I lived through it. I did not accept the life that had been given me as calmly and as kindly as Joseph had. I remember that anger that I had that built up inside me, and literally, like you said, put that wall up between myself and God and anyone who had anything to do with God. So to add that to the situation, we see the spirit that was in him, the attitude that is still possible. And I've seen youth who, at that age, they are able to overcome. So we know that it's possible, not only through Joseph, but we've probably experienced those kids in our own lives, whether, Lord willing, it was your own kids or someone else's kids. We've seen that it's possible to get through that difficult time in life without all the rebellion that is so common to that age. It is possible.
If we're not careful, even adults, seasoned Christians, seasoned ministers in the Lord, someone look at us cross-eyed, and and it takes us years to get over it.
Absolutely.
And
I think that capability of enduring through that time and age is just a reflection of Jesus Christ living in them.
Absolutely.
We don't hear about Jesus at that age, but that's how I would imagine
Yeah.
he would be just like Joseph.
Right, absolutely. Yeah. That's a good point. Part 2, his years in Egypt. Genesis 39, 2 and 3, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. Why? Because he was faithful in whatever it was that was put upon him. Genesis 41:39, 40 and 44. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, we skipped ahead a lot here, for as much as God hath shewed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according to thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. In verse 44, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. When the Lord prospers his own, it enrages the devil. Thus it was with Joseph. Potiphar placed the utmost confidence in this young man, this young servant, because he had proven himself worthy. But Potiphar's wife made improper advances toward him, and he fled from her presence. She brought false accusation against him to her husband. On circumstantial evidence alone, Potiphar had Joseph imprisoned. Now the text here says circumstantial evidence alone. Yet consider Potiphar's title. Has anyone ever looked up Potiphar's title in the original language? When we see his title for what it is, suddenly this accusation and his response to it takes on a whole new light. The Bible calls him captain of the guard. Now, if you look back at the original language, the literal translation is chief of the butchers. It's a title Potiphar had, chief of the butchers. By extension, this meant that he was the head executioner for Pharaoh. The head executioner. My thought is that anyone who kills people for a living is not going to think twice about immediately executing a slave who is accused of making improper advances toward his wife. Wouldn't think twice. But by only placing Joseph in prison, he makes very clear just what he thinks of his wife's accusations. Also, if you pay attention, you read in Genesis 40:2 through 4, and Pharaoh was wroth against 2 of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers, and he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard. Now, who's the captain of the guard? It's Potiphar. Potiphar was captain of the guard. Put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. So where was Joseph in prison? In Potiphar's house, which also happened to be the prison. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. Once again, where was the prison? Potiphar's house. Who was over the prison? Potiphar. Potiphar was familiar enough with his wife to know the truth, but as a high-ranking political figure, he had to keep up appearances. He was not willing to be rid of such a faithful member of his staff. Simply gave him another job. Outside of his wife's reach, we see that God was faithful through the chief of the butchers to protect Joseph and keep him. But the Lord showed him mercy, back in the commentary, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison, who would have been another one of Potiphar's servants, who committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners, and that which he did, the Lord made to prosper. Genesis 29:21 through 23. In fact, from the account in chapters 40 and 41, it's clear that his prison experiences were of the Lord. His interpretation of the prisoner's dreams opened the way into the presence of Pharaoh himself. When God had alerted him, that is Pharaoh, to a coming famine through a dream, Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream, giving God the glory. Pharaoh recognized that God was with this Hebrew, and he made him the second ruler over all the land of Egypt, to administer the storing and distribution of corn. Joseph was 30 years old. So he had been a slave and imprisoned for 13 years at this point. He had been in Egypt 13 years as both a slave and a prisoner. Now this all came about as a direct result of Joseph's faithfulness through every setback. He would not be discouraged in any situation because he knew that God was with him. While it's not necessarily always the case that if we have the same attitude in the face of unimaginable adversity, false accusations and unjust imprisonments, we will become second only to the president or some other head of state. You can be certain that the end result will be better than the beginning. Joseph knew that whatever it was that God was allowing in his life, it had a purpose. And he was going to do his best with whatever opportunity came his way. He could have become bitter and filled with anger. But then the outcome would have been very different. Remember, whatever it may be that you're going through right now, it's a much, much, much easier road than the one Joseph traveled. Whatever we may be facing, the worst of the trials that we are currently experiencing in this life, how do they add up to what Joseph went through? Even close? Nothing. Nothing. He remained focused on living his life in a way that would be pleasing to God, no matter what he had to experience. On a much lighter note, Brother Caleb and I were talking about his new mail route. It's a difficult experience to go through that change, but he knows that it's going to work to his benefit in the end. And so he's willing to suffer through it. It may not be pleasant going through those beginning phases of something new in your life. But if we trusted the Lord, we know that He's going to work it for our betterment. Caleb knows that this is a new job and it's going to be a difficult time. But it's working up to his betterment, the betterment of his family. We have to understand that whatever it is that we're facing, we have to have that same attitude that Joseph had. Well, once again, whatever it may be, whether it's something that we know is going to work for our benefit, like a new job, or whether it's something we can't immediately see working to our benefit because it's not a pleasant experience in any way, shape, or form. God knows what He's doing. We were talking about the other day, I think in the band service there at Athens, God puts every ruler in command. Talking about, well, you don't like Obama, didn't like Obama, well, it don't matter if you liked him or not. God put him in office because he couldn't be in office if God hadn't allowed it to be so. There's nothing we could do to keep him out of office because God wanted him in. You don't like Trump? Who cares? He's the one that God has put in office right now. It's not about what we want, it's about what God has chosen. There's nothing that we can do to keep him from being president right now because that's the one that God has put in there. And if God is in charge of those big things, and we can see that, why is it so hard for us to accept that He's in charge of the little things too that don't affect an entire nation, but maybe just affect a household or just affect one individual? If He controls the big things, He controls the little things too. If He is the one who places people in power, He is also the one who places us in every situation that we face. Good or bad, big or small, whatever it is, we need to trust that God knows what He's doing. And everything that we face has the potential to work for our benefit if we allow it to. Sister Dolores there was talking about, Sister Angie talked, so you can go out and you can see that speed limit sign and you can either follow it or not. It's your choice. It's a choice that we make. And so is everything else in this life. It's a choice that we make. How we face the difficult times in this life, it's a choice that we make. We can allow those choices that we make to destroy us, or we can allow the choices that we make to benefit us by fully submitting to whatever it is that God has allowed in our lives. And then overcoming for God's glory, for our own benefit, and for the benefit of those around us. There's no telling how much good can be accomplished simply by submitting to the will of God, especially when we don't particularly like the will of God at the moment. It's easy to enjoy new job, bigger, better pay, more benefits. Yeah, these are things to look forward to. So it's well worth going through that suffering, through that difficult time there of initially starting out that new job. But it's just as important when the thing that we're going through, we can't see the benefits that are going to come in the end because of the suffering, the difficulty that we're currently experiencing. We need to know that God's in charge. God is in charge of all things. The Bible is a mirror that should reveal ourselves to us. When we look at it, we should see ourselves. If we don't see ourselves responding the way Joseph responded to the situations he's facing, if we don't see ourselves responding that same way, we need to step up. We need to draw a little closer to God. Lord, I need the strength. I can't do this on my own. I need your help, God, to get me through this trial, because I know that you've put this trial in my life for a reason. You want to be a blessing to me and to others through this trial, or I wouldn't be experiencing it right now. And He will give us the strength to endure if we'll receive it. Just like that speed limit sign. You can ignore it or you can use it. You can pay attention to it. The will of God is the same. We can submit to the will of God and accept what we're dealing with at the moment, or we can fight against it. If we fight against the will of God, we fight against our current situation that's unpleasant, you can be sure that it's not going to work out for our benefit. But when we're surrendered to God, He can use anything for our benefit and His glory and the benefit of others. Why would we not face anything head on, knowing that we have God on our side, whatever we may be facing, whatever we may be experiencing? Part 3, Israel and Egypt, Genesis 42:3. And Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy corn in Egypt. Genesis 45:17-18. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto thy brethren, This do ye, lade your beasts, and go get you to the land of Canaan, and take your father and your household, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. Genesis 47:5, 6, and 11. And Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, Thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. The land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and thy brethren to dwell. In the land of Goshen let them dwell. And if thou knowest any men of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. Verse 11, And Joseph placed his father and his brethren, and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses, as Pharaoh had commanded. Genesis 48:21. And Israel said unto Joseph, Behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. At this time Pharaoh gave Joseph a wife, Asenath, the daughter of an Egyptian priest. They had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. They were mentioned briefly in Lesson 3. As Joseph had interpreted, there were 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of dearth and famine, which was over all the face of the earth. But there was bread and corn in Egypt, and all countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn. In Canaan, Jacob heard that corn was available in Egypt. So he sent his 10 sons to buy corn. Presumably, they did not know where the Midianites had sold their brother more than 20 years earlier. But if they had supposed he had been sold into Egypt, their hatred and contempt would have envisioned him as a worthless, insignificant slave. But those years had changed the youth into a mature man, And the God whom they so poorly represented had exalted his humble servant and clothed him in royal attire. He knew his brethren, but they did not know him. Their dealings with him and his with them are a well-known story. Upon their second trip for corn, Joseph put his brethren through a grueling inquisition, during which they played upon their aged father's health and welfare in order to obtain Joseph's favor. But they made no confession of wrongdoing so many years ago. Now, I personally, looking at this, I tend to differ with this statement. Now, while dealing with Joseph and still not knowing it was him, Joseph was clearly testing his brothers to see if they had accepted the seriousness of their poor behavior toward him more than 20 years before. This wasn't some sort of punishment. Rather, he wanted to know that these men had matured and regretted selling their brother into slavery. If we read in Genesis 42:21 and 22, and they said one to another, this is Joseph's brothers, we are very guilty concerning our brother, and that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. They knew the reason for their current suffering. And Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not unto you, saying, Do not sin against the child, and you would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. This may not have been an outright confession, but it was clearly an acknowledgement of their own guilt. Joseph was also able to see that at least one of them was against the idea of selling him or killing him from the beginning. As this extended trial went on, it was apparent that Benjamin was going to be imprisoned for the accusation of stealing the silver cup. And who was it that stepped up to right the wrong he had done so long ago? It wasn't too little too late. His guilt had strengthened his resolve, and he was not about to do anything else to hurt his father any more than he already had. Genesis 44:18 and 33 through 34 we read, And Judah came near unto him, that is Joseph, and said, O my Lord, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my Lord's ear. And let not thine anger burn against thy servant, for thou art even as Pharaoh. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, If I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord. And the lad go up with his brethren. For how shall I go up to my father, and the lad be not with me? Lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come on my father. Now for over 20 years these brothers had witnessed the devastating effects of the loss of Joseph on their father Jacob. His utter brokenness at the loss of Joseph had weighed heavily on their hearts every single day since his loss. Their guilt was a prison and torment far greater than what Joseph had faced in Egypt. He may have missed his family and desired his freedom, but his faith had ensured him a powerful victory at last. Not a vengeful victory over his rotten brothers, but a mighty triumph over the enemy who sought to divide them. God always seeks to restore what the enemy would have destroyed. But we must remain faithful if we find ourselves in the place of Joseph, and we must acknowledge our guilt and freely confess if we find ourselves among his brothers. This is the only way to defeat our true adversary. It doesn't matter which side of this equation we're on. It doesn't matter if we're the ones who are being wronged or if we are the ones who have wronged someone else. We need to have the attitude that God would have us to. It took over 20 years for his brothers to come to an acknowledgement of what they had done. Once again, I think about the suffering we see as we look at Jacob during this time. It says that he mourned every day for his son. For 20-some years, he mourned every day for his son. And for 20-some years, his brothers Joseph's brothers saw what they had done to their father. They saw the misery that they had brought upon the one. They wanted his love. That's why they wanted rid of Joseph, because they thought, well, if we're rid of Joseph, then maybe we can get some of that love that he was heaping up on Joseph. He wasn't heaping up on us. And instead what they got was 20-some years of misery dealing with what they had done. I can only imagine their guilt growing every day, seeing the misery of their father. But Joseph was overcome with compassion, especially for his father, and he revealed his identity. Of course, they were troubled at his patience, but he assured him that there would be no vengeance. He said to them, "Now therefore, be not grieved nor angry with yourselves that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life." Joseph understood. Joseph acknowledged. He recognized the benefit of the time that he had faced suffering. His brothers, they didn't understand. But Joseph, the one you would think would be least likely to understand because of the situation, he was the first to come to a realization that this was just more than one person suffering. This was the preservation of life. Say, God did send me before you to preserve life. And isn't that the way God works? By this time, Joseph understood the reason for his trial and gave glory to God for providing hope in the midst of drought. Hope for life through the stores of food, and hope for reconciliation with his estranged family through forgiveness. Isn't this the way God works? He works for preservation of life. But we have to be sensitive to His Spirit. We have to be sensitive to His will and acknowledge that just because I'm suffering, it's not all about me. We as humans have a tendency to focus on ourselves and the suffering we're experiencing and not being able to see the bigger picture. Joseph might not have seen the bigger picture until much later, but he saw the bigger picture. But before he saw the benefit of his suffering, he was still faithful. He didn't allow his personal difficulty, his personal discomfort to destroy his faithfulness to God. He couldn't see the end of the situation. We can't see the end of the situation that we're currently experiencing, good or bad. We can't see it. But we should know that if we trust God and allow Him to have His way in our lives, it'll work for our better. And it'll work for the better of others as well. Think about this. This is God. God did send me before you to preserve life. He's looking. He doesn't have an attitude of anger toward his brothers for selling him into slavery. He's not angry with them, but he recognized the benefit that God was working in the situation. He said, God did send me before you. We want to think, well, they did it. They're trying to destroy me. The brother's thinking, I can't believe we messed up so bad trying to kill our brother and then we sold him into slavery. But God always, if there's faithfulness in the situation, God will take what the enemy intends to use to destroy us, and He will turn it around and use it for His glory. I'm sure we've probably each experienced something similar in our own lives, probably not to that extent, but something that we faced that we didn't know why we were facing. We didn't know why we were having to experience it, but then when we came to a point, we realized, oh my goodness, that's what this is all about. There's a benefit behind this trial that I've been experiencing. Back in the commentary, then arrangements were made with Pharaoh's blessing to bring Jacob and his family to Egypt. They were nourished by Joseph, and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions therein and grew and multiplied exceedingly. All because of a forgiving son and brother who by faith kept his life in the hands of an all-wise God. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years and died at the age of 147. Part 4, Joseph's last years, Genesis 50 22 and 24 through 26. And Joseph dwelt in Egypt in his father's house, and Joseph lived 110 years. Verse 24, and Joseph said unto his brethren, I die, and God will surely visit you, and bring you out of this land into the land which he sware to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And Joseph took an oath of the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones from hence. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. And they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Hebrews 11:22. By faith Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel, and gave commandment concerning his bones. His brethren is a reference to any who may have survived him, as well as to their posterity. His lifelong faith in the promise of God had not diminished in this Gentile land. Another generation was simply passing without the fulfillment, but it would be fulfilled. God will surely visit you, he said twice. We'll skip down just a little bit. Despite his 93 years under God's care in a foreign land, and despite the favor which Pharaoh had extended to him and his family, the blessing most to be desired awaited him elsewhere. The writer to the Hebrews credits it all to his faith. The record affirms that his request was honored. In conclusion, our golden truth reminds us that we may not always discern the purpose of God in the adversities to which we are subjected. As Joseph said, God may mean it for good, if not for ourselves, perhaps for someone we love. His purpose may not be discerned immediately. It was at least 13 years from the time Joseph was